The rain battered Seattle's Harborview Medical Center, a relentless downpour that turned the streets into rivers and the night into a blur of chaos. It was just after 1 a.m., and the emergency room was a battlefield, its fluorescent lights flickering under the strain of a power grid pushed to its limits. Sophie Bennett, a 27-year-old nurse with 3 years of ER experience, stood at the triage desk, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her scrubs already stained with coffee from a spilled cup during a hectic handoff. Tonight was her third consecutive 12-hour shift, and exhaustion clung to her like the damp chill seeping through the hospital's walls. She never imagined this routine night would unravel her life, only to rebuild it in ways she couldn't fathom. The ER was teetering on the edge of collapse. A multi-car pileup on I-5 had flooded the trauma bays with victims, and a flu outbreak had packed the waiting room with coughing patients. Sophie moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her hazel eyes scanning charts, her hands steady as she adjusted IVs and reassured frightened families. The room was a cacophony of beeping monitors, shouted orders, and the wail of a child in pain. But for a fleeting moment, as Sophie handed a chart to a harried resident, the ER fell into an eerie calm, like the pause between heartbeats. Then the double doors exploded open, a gust of wind and rain tearing through the entrance like a vengeful spirit. 2 paramedics, soaked to the bone, pushed a stretcher into the fray, their faces grim. On it lay a young man, his body battered, his face a mask of blood and dirt. "Code red," one paramedic shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "Male, late 20s, no ID, unresponsive massive chest trauma, possible shrapnel wounds, vitals crashing." Sophie's breath caught as she stepped forward, her eyes locking onto the patient. His military uniform was shredded, the olive drab fabric torn away to reveal jagged wounds across his torso. His combat boots dangled loosely, one lace trailing like a broken promise. A glint of metal caught her eye, a dog tag, twisted and smeared with grime, engraved with C. Monroe, U.S. Army. A soldier. Her heart thudded, a mix of adrenaline and dread. "He's military," a tech whispered. "Where's his ID?" Another asked. "None," the paramedic replied. "Found him near the port, alone. No phone, no comms. Looks like he was dumped." The room froze. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances. The charge nurse, Carla, hesitated, her voice low. "We don't have clearance for this. He could be classified. We wait for federal authorization." Sophie blinked, disbelief surging through her. Wait? The man on the stretcher was fading, his pulse a faint flutter, his skin ashen. "He's crashing," a tech called, the monitor's shrill alarm confirming the urgency. Sophie didn't hesitate. "Prep trauma, Bay 2, she barked, her voice sharp and commanding. "I need a suture kit, oxygen and blood. O-neg, stat." Carla raised a hand. "Sophie, you're not authorized. Stand down." Sophie's eyes flashed with defiance. "He'll be dead in 5 minutes if we wait." The room held its breath, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then, as if her resolve was infectious, the team sprang into action. The stretcher's wheels screeched against the linoleum as they rushed the soldier into the trauma bay, Sophie leading the charge, her gloves snapping on with a sharp crack. Inside, the room was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Sophie grabbed gauze and began wiping blood from the soldier's chest, revealing jagged metal shards embedded in his ribcage, each one pulsing blood with his weakening heartbeat. Her jaw clenched. "Vitals, BP 65/35, pulse ox 78, dropping." "Fast!" a tech shouted. Sophie's world narrowed to the man before her. The noise faded, the alarms, the voices, the storm outside, replaced by the rhythm of her own commands. Scalpel, clamp, suction. Her hands moved with precision, pulling out shrapnel piece by piece, her fingers slick with blood, sweat stinging. Her eyes. The monitor's erratic beeps taunted her, a reminder of how close he was to slipping away. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Come on, stay with me." At one point, the monitor flatlined, a piercing wail that stopped her heart. She didn't pause. Her hands compressed his chest, counting aloud, her arms burning with effort. Charge to 200. Clear. The defibrillator's shock jolted his body. Nothing. Again, 250. Clear. His body arched, and the monitor flickered, a faint beep breaking the silence. He's back, a tech gasped. Sophie didn't stop. She stitched a gaping wound, inserted a chest tube to drain internal bleeding, and stabilized a collapsed lung. Her hands, cramped and bloodied, never faltered. 4 hours later, the storm outside had quieted, and so had the trauma bay. The team stood back, exhausted, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Blood bags hung empty, the floor littered with gauze and wrappers. Sophie peeled off her gloves, her hands trembling, and stared at the soldier. His chest rose and fell, slow but steady. His eyes fluttered open, just for a moment, meeting hers. His lips moved, a whisper too faint to hear, but she felt it. Gratitude. Relief flooded her, so intense her knees nearly buckled. She'd done it. Against all odds, she'd saved him. But as she stepped out of the trauma bay, the weight of what she'd done settled over her. She'd broken protocol, acted without clearance, and the hospital's bureaucracy was unforgiving. The soldier was alive, but at what cost? Dawn broke over Seattle, the city waking under a sky still heavy with clouds. The ER had settled into a weary calm, the chaos of the night giving way to the hum of routine. Sophie stood in the break room, clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee she hadn't touched. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her hair escaping its bun, but her mind was fixed on the recovery wing, where Sergeant Caleb Monroe now rested, his vitals stable. The quiet triumph of saving him warmed her chest, a flicker of light in the exhaustion that weighed her down. She'd always wanted to be a nurse, inspired by her mother, a hospice caregiver who'd taught her the power of compassion in the face of suffering. Sophie had worked hard for this life, nursing school on scholarships, late nights studying in her tiny Capitol Hill apartment, grueling shifts at Harborview. She loved the ER's intensity, the chance to make a difference when seconds mattered. But tonight she'd crossed a line, and she knew the consequences were coming. The intercom crackled, summoning her to the administrator's office. Her stomach twisted. She'd expected a reprimand, maybe a suspension, but the voice was cold. Final. She walked down the sterile corridor, passing colleagues who avoided her gaze, their silence louder than words. The office door was open, revealing Dr. Margaret Voss, the hospital's chief administrator, and Mr. Ellis, the legal counsel. Sophie stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly. "You wanted to see me?" Dr. Voss didn't smile. "Sit." Sophie obeyed, her nerves prickling. "What you did last night," Voss began, "was brave, but it was reckless. You treated a potentially classified patient without authorization, putting this hospital at legal risk." Sophie leaned forward, stunned. He was dying. "I didn't have time to wait for clearance." Mr. Ellis adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Bennett, protocols exist to protect everyone. Treating a military patient without federal approval could have national security implications. Your actions, while well-intentioned, were a violation." Sophie's voice rose, trembling with disbelief. "A violation? I saved his life. That's what I'm trained to do." Voss glanced at her watch, her expression unyielding. "You're a skilled nurse, Sophie, but rules are rules. You're terminated effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow, stealing her breath. The room spun, the tick of the clock on Voss's desk deafening. "I saved him," Sophie whispered, more to herself than to them. "And we acknowledge that," Ellis said, his tone flat. "But this decision is final." The meeting ended abruptly. Sophie walked to her locker in a daze, her badge heavy in her hand. Sophie Bennett, RN, it read, a title that now felt like a mockery. She emptied her locker, stethoscope, a half-eaten granola bar, a photo of her mom, into a tote bag, her movements mechanical. Around her, the staff was silent. A few offered sympathetic glances, but no one spoke. She stepped outside, the Seattle air damp and heavy, and stood on the curb, staring at the hospital. This place, where she'd poured her heart, had discarded her for doing what she believed was right. "All I did was save a life," she murmured, her voice breaking. With that, she turned and walked away. Back in her apartment, a cramped studio. With a view of a brick wall, Sophie collapsed onto her couch. The dog tag, C. Monroe, U.S. Army, sat on her coffee table, a relic of the night that had cost her everything. She hadn't meant to keep it, but it had stayed in her pocket, a tangible link to the soldier she'd saved. Sleep eluded her, her mind replaying the trauma bay, the administrator's office, the weight of her badge as she'd left it behind. She didn't turn on the TV or check her phone. She just sat, staring at the dog tag, wondering what came next. A sharp knock startled her. It wasn't a neighbor's tap or a delivery driver's casual rap. It was authoritative, insistent. Sophie padded to the door, peering through the peephole. A man in a black suit, sunglasses despite the overcast sky, stood flanked by two others, their earpieces glinting. Her heart raced. "Miss Sophie Bennett?" the man asked, his voice clipped. She opened the door a crack. "Yes?" "I'm Agent Hayes, U.S. Secret Service. You're requested at the White House." Sophie blinked, her mind struggling to process. "The White House? Why?" Hayes's expression didn't change. "I'm not at liberty to say. It's urgent. We'll escort you now." Her mouth went dry. "I'm not dressed," she stammered, gesturing to her sweatpants and faded t-shirt. "You'll have time to change en route," he replied. Confusion swirled in her chest, but something in Hayes's tone told her this wasn't optional. She grabbed her purse, slipping the dog tag inside, and threw on jeans and a blouse, her hands shaking as she tied her hair back. Outside, her quiet street was lined with black SUVs, neighbors peering from windows, a child pointing from a porch. Sophie gave a weak wave before being ushered into a vehicle, its leather seats cold against her skin, as the convoy sped toward the airport. She clutched the dog tag, its edges biting into her palm. What had she done to warrant this? The SUV's tinted windows turned the world outside into a blur of shadows, the hum of the engine the only sound in the tense silence. Sophie sat in the back seat, her purse clutched to her chest, the dog tag a heavy weight inside. The convoy moved with precision, weaving through Seattle's morning traffic, drivers parting without hesitation. Agent Hayes sat in the front, his posture rigid, his responses to her questions curt. "Why am I going to the White House?" she'd asked again. "You'll be briefed upon arrival," was all he said. The vehicles pulled into a private hangar at SeaTac Airport, where a sleek jet waited, its engines idling. Sophie's stomach lurched as she was escorted aboard, the cabin stark and functional, with a handful of suited agents already seated. A female agent handed her a garment bag. "You can change in the back," she said, her tone neutral. Inside was a navy blazer, slacks, and a white blouse, professional, understated, far from her usual scrubs. Sophie changed quickly, her reflection in the small mirror unfamiliar, her face pale, her eyes wide with uncertainty. The flight to D.C. was surreal, the jet cutting through the clouds as Sophie's mind raced. She thought of Caleb Monroe, the soldier she'd saved. Was he someone important? Was she in trouble for keeping the dog tag? The thought sent a chill through her. She'd acted on instinct, not malice, but the world of classified military patience was a maze she didn't understand. She glanced out the window, the patchwork of America below offering no answers. Landing at Joint Base Andrews, the convoy resumed, speeding through the capital's streets. The Washington Monument loomed in the distance, a stark reminder of where she was headed. Sophie's hands trembled as they approached the White House, its iconic facade both majestic and intimidating. The SUVs rolled through iron gates, past armed guards, and stopped at a side entrance. Agent Hayes opened her door. "This way, Ms. Bennett." Her footsteps echoed on the marble floors of the White House corridors, portraits of past presidents, watching from the walls. Staffers in crisp suits moved with purpose, their voices hushed. Sophie's heart pounded, her purse strap cutting into her shoulder. The dog tag felt like a secret she wasn't supposed to carry. Two aides, both young and polished, escorted her to a set of double doors. "He's waiting for you," one said softly. The doors opened, revealing the President of the United States. He stood near the resolute desk, his presence commanding yet weary, his suit impeccable, but his eyes tired. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice warm but measured. "Thank you for coming." Sophie froze, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, Mr. President," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He gestured to a leather armchair. "Please sit." She sank into the seat, her hands knotted in her lap. The President paced briefly, then stopped, his gaze piercing. "You saved my nephew," he said, the words landing like a thunderbolt. Sophie's breath caught. I didn't know who he was." He nodded, a faint smile softening his features. "That's what makes your actions extraordinary. When others hesitated, you acted. Because of you, Caleb is alive." Sophie's throat tightened, emotions swirling. Relief, shock, disbelief. The door opened and the First Lady entered, her elegance tempered by raw emotion. She crossed the room and embraced Sophie, her voice a whisper. "You gave us back our family." Tears pricked Sophie's eyes, the weight of the moment overwhelming. For the first time since the ER, she felt seen, not as a rule breaker, but as a hero. The President stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I've reviewed the hospital's report, watched the security footage, spoken to your colleagues. Some called your actions reckless. I call them courageous." He paused, letting the words settle. "We brought you here to thank you, and to honor you." A knock at the door signaled the arrival of the press, their cameras clicking softly as they filed in. A military aide entered, carrying a velvet box. Sophie's heart raced, confusion mingling with awe. The President nodded to an aide who unveiled a document on an easel bearing the presidential seal. "For extraordinary bravery," he read, "for prioritizing humanity over protocol in a moment of life and death, and for saving a U.S. Army soldier under dire circumstances, it is my honor to award the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Nurse Sophie Bennett." The room erupted in applause, the cameras flashing like lightning. Sophie's mouth fell open, her voice a whisper. "I don't deserve this." The First Lady, standing beside her, squeezed her hand. "You do." The President lifted the medal, its blue ribbon shimmering, and placed it around Sophie's neck. The weight of it grounded her, a tangible reminder of the life she'd saved, and the path it had set her on. But the surprises didn't end there. The President raised a hand, silencing the room. "This administration values those who lead with courage. As of today, Sophie Bennett is appointed head nurse of the White House Medical Unit." Sophie staggered, her mind reeling. I'm not employed," she stammered. The President smiled. "You are now." The First Lady added, "You'll have housing near the White House, a full salary, and the authority to build your team. You deserve a future, not a punishment." An aide handed Sophie a folder containing her official appointment, signed and sealed. "Do you accept?" the President asked. Sophie glanced at the dog tag in her purse, then at the President. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The room cheered, the moment a whirlwind of light and sound. As the press dispersed, Sophie stood alone with the President and First Lady, their gratitude humbling. "Caleb wants to meet you when he's stronger," the First Lady said. "He owes you everything." Sophie nodded, tears spilling freely. She'd lost her job, her sense of belonging, but in this moment, she'd gained something greater. Purpose. 2 weeks later, Sophie stood on the south lawn of the White House, the spring breeze carrying the scent of blooming cherry blossoms. A stage had been set up, flanked by American flags. A crowd of reporters and dignitaries gathered before it. She wore a tailored navy dress, her hair swept into a low bun, the Medal of Freedom gleaming at her throat. Her nerves fluttered, but she stood tall, her hands clasped calmly. The President took the podium, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Some wear scrubs, working tirelessly in the shadows. Sophie Bennett is one such hero, acting with compassion and courage when it mattered most." He turned to her. "Today we honor her not just with a medal, but with a new beginning." An aide stepped forward, presenting a wooden box. Inside lay a golden key, glinting in the sunlight. "This is the key to your new home," the president said. "A gift from a grateful nation." The crowd gasped, then cheered. Sophie's eyes widened as a screen behind the stage displayed a colonial-style house in Arlington, Virginia. White with blue shutters, a wraparound porch, a place that felt like a dream. Sophie took the key, her fingers trembling, tears welling. Reporters shouted questions. "How does it feel to go from fired to honored? What was that night like?" She stepped to the microphone, her voice steady despite her emotions. "I'm humbled," she said. "I did what any nurse would do, save a life. Losing my job hurt, but it showed me what matters. Doing what's right, no matter the cost. This is more than I ever imagined." The crowd roared, social, media alight with bomber nurse hero and Sophie Bennett. But the president wasn't finished. "Sophie's courage deserves responsibility," he said. "She is now the permanent head nurse of the White House Medical Unit, a role she's already proving she was born for." Sophie's heart swelled, the weight of her new life both daunting and exhilarating. After the ceremony, Sophie toured her new home, its hardwood floors gleaming, its rooms filled with light. A small library held medical texts and novels, a nod to her love of reading. She stood in the master bedroom, tears streaming down her face, the dog tag in her pocket a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. From a fired nurse to a national hero, she'd found her place. Months later, Sophie stood in the White House Medical Unit, her badge reading, "Sophie Bennett, RN, Director of Medical Services." The clinic was a world apart from Harborview. Quiet, formal, its walls adorned with historical photos. Her days were a whirlwind of high-stakes tasks, treating cabinet members, preparing for state visits, coordinating with Secret Service medics. She'd treated a senator's sprained ankle, briefed staff on emergency protocols, and once tended to the president after a minor cut, her hands steady despite the surreal setting. Her team respected her, drawn to her calm authority and genuine care. She'd handpicked nurses and medics who shared her values, creating a unit that balanced precision with compassion. But her favorite moments were with Caleb Monroe, who visited one morning in his dress uniform, his recovery remarkable. "Permission to enter?" he asked, a grin breaking his formal demeanor. Sophie laughed, waving him in. He saluted, then handed her a wrapped package. Inside was a bronze star medal awarded for his service. "I wouldn't be here without you," he said. "This is yours, unofficially." Sophie shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You're alive. That's enough." They talked for hours, his gratitude a mirror to her own sense of purpose. But not everyone celebrated her rise. Whispers followed her, former colleagues who called her lucky, online trolls who questioned her motives. She broke protocol and got a mansion. One comment read, "The criticism stung, a reminder of the camaraderie she'd lost at Harborview. She missed the ER's raw energy, the bonds forged in crisis." One night, unable to sleep, she drove to Harborview, parking across the street. The hospital glowed under artificial light, its chaos unchanged. Slipping inside, her hoodie pulled low, Sophie watched the staff hustle. A young nurse struggled with an IV, her hands shaking as a patient groaned. Sophie stepped forward, whispering, "Breathe, angle it here." The nurse, startled, followed her guidance, then nodded thanks. Sophie left before anyone recognized her, her heart lighter. She'd been that nurse once, and she'd never forget. Inspired by that night, Sophie founded a scholarship fund for aspiring nurses, funded anonymously to avoid media attention. She reviewed applications in her White House office, reading stories of students from struggling families, their dreams echoing her own. She sent acceptance letters, some handwritten, each one a promise. "The world needs you. Keep going." One spring morning, Sophie stood on the White House South Lawn, overseeing a ceremony for her mentorship program, a new initiative pairing young healthcare workers with seasoned professionals. Caleb Monroe attended, his presence a quiet honor. He spoke to the recruits, his voice strong. "Sophie didn't just save me. She showed me what courage looks like. Learn from her." The recruits listened, rapt, as Sophie addressed them. "You'll doubt yourself," she said, "but your purpose will guide you. Hold on to it." The crowd applauded, and Sophie felt a wholeness she'd never known. Later, in her office, she touched the dog tag on her desk. C. Monroe, U.S. Army, a symbol of her journey from loss to redemption. The headline still carried her name, her story a beacon of resilience. She walked the White House halls with confidence, no longer the nurse who'd been fired, but a leader shaping the future. Her legacy wasn't in medals or titles, but in the lives she'd touch, the nurses she'd inspire, the purpose she'd claimed. If this story of courage and redemption moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring narratives. What did you think of Sophie Bennett's journey? From saving a soldier's life to becoming a White House leader, her story is one of resilience and heart. Share your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 1 to 10.